Today I am making a whipped peppermint gelatin, and this is an experimental recipe for me, so we'll see whether I get to post this as a fail or success video. I'm starting by blooming the gelatin, which is where you put the gelatin in cold water to soften and start absorbing liquid before you actually try to mix it into your hot liquid. And it just makes it much easier to work with this way. So I'm taking a tablespoon of unflavored gelatin, which is roughly equal to a packet of Knox gelatin or any packet gelatin that you might be working with. And I'm just sprinkling it over a quarter cup of cold water. And then I'm going to let it kind of soak in for a minute, and then I'm going to stir it to make sure that it all gets mixed into the water without lumps or anything. And then while I let that set and absorb the water, I'm going to start working on my tea mixture. You can use any kind of tea, like I'm doing it with a peppermint tea. I'd really like to try it with a rooibos chai that my friend makes, but unfortunately I'm out of that right now, so we're trying it with peppermint. I'm putting 2 cups of boiling water in my Pyrex measuring cup. And then I'm going to add half a cup of turbinado sugar, and I'm going to stir that in to make sure it dissolves. You could probably also use honey or agave in this recipe. Slightly less honey, maybe more like 1/3 of a cup. And now that the sugar's dissolved, I'm going to go ahead and steep my peppermint tea in that mixture. I'm using a tablespoon of loose peppermint tea. You could also use 2 peppermint tea bags, or as I said, any kind of tea that you wanted to use. And I'm going to steep that for probably about 5 minutes or so, because I want a really strong peppermint tea for this. Alright, the gelatin has been blooming and the tea has been steeping for about 5 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and put the gelatin, which you can see is almost like the consistency of finger jello at this point. Put that into my bowl, and I'm going to break it up a little bit to make sure that it mixes in with the boiling water okay. It's almost like a very thick applesauce kind of feel. And then I'm going to take the tea, which is still very hot, fortunately, and I'm going to strain it through this very handy little mesh strainer right into the gelatin. Obviously, if you're using tea bags, you can skip the straining step. And then I'm going to use a whisk to make sure that the gelatin all dissolves. If you're that sort of a cook, you can stick your fingers in here and check and see if you can feel any gelatin lumps. Or if you don't like getting your hands in your cooking, then you can just kind of look and see. Make sure you don't see any. It is very hot, though. I discovered that when I stuck my finger in there to feel for gelatin lumps, so be careful about that. And at this point, I'm going to refrigerate it until it's soft set. So I'm going to check in about an hour, and I'll be looking for gelatin that's not firmly set yet, but is not liquid anymore. The jello's been setting for about 2 hours, and you can see it's at that stage where it still kind of runs when you tip it, but it's definitely not just still liquid. There's some sticking to the edges of the bowl, and it's kind of hard to see from that angle of the camera, but it's definitely thicker, much thicker than it was. So I'm going to pour this in a blender here, and we'll see how this whipping process works. Alright, that was, I think, maybe like 10 seconds in the blender on low, and it looks very frothy now and aerated. So I'm just going to pour it back in the bowl here, and it's, let's see, almost doubled in volume, which is why I got a larger bowl than I needed for the original amount of jello, because doubled in volume is about what you're going for with a whipped gelatin. So now I just put it back in the bowl, and then I put it back in the fridge to finish setting for another couple hours. And then I will come back and let you know how it turned out. The whipped peppermint gelatin set after about 2 more hours in the fridge, and it reminds me a little bit the way it's set of the 1, 2, 3 jello that we used to get when I was a kid, where there's really foamy on top, and then kind of foamy, and then like normal jello underneath. You may kind of be able to see, I put it in a goblet so you can see the layers a little bit better. Really foamy, and then like normal jello. And it tastes amazing. It's very pepperminty, It's a nice, light, refreshing dessert, and if you're going to serve it in a goblet, I would recommend pouring it into the goblet after you whip it in the blender, and then letting it sit in there so that it'll get the layering very elegant and proper instead of just spooned into the goblet. But it's the sort of dessert that you can serve at a garden party or someplace very elegant and really make people think that you must have spent a long time on it. And my husband said it was very good and that I should make it again, so that is definitely a win.